Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It is time once again for my weekly chatty catch-up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading, as well as some general lifey chit-chat and catch-up on my week. And this week it is a little dark. It's raining, so apologies that it is less lit than usual. Let's dive into books because I read a lot of tiny short things this week, so I have an extra lot to catch up on beyond usual. Let's start with the one that I think was least successful, and that was A New Me by Helen Oyeymi. And I did not know that Oyeymi had a new book coming out, so this was kind of a random grab off the shelf. The premise really sold me because it's about a person who has sort of siloed off the different parts of their personality into an identity for each day of the week. And that sounds really interesting. And I think there probably is something there about like modern day influencer culture based on what I read, but I gave up on it. So I had started reading and read through a chapter and was kind of like, I do not have a clue what is going on. None. So I set it aside and waited till the next day and decided to pick it up again, thinking maybe it was just my mindset or where I was at mentally, and started reading again, and it continued that way into the next chapter. So I read 60 pages, which is a significant portion of this book since it's under 300 pages. And I just could not grasp anything that was going on. I could tell you individual little elements that were there, but nothing was coherent. And I know from reading previously Oyeymi's work, I think in Gingerbread, that's a very long book, and there were definitely sections where I had to just kind of trust that the author was going to get me through confusing parts. And this, it just was everything. So I'm not in the right space to read that right now. I might throw that trust behind the author and try it again later on, but now is not the time for that. So I abandoned it and returned it to the library. Then I also read for my book club Vagabond by Tim Curry. And this was a fantastic memoir. So from one end of the spectrum to the other, I think this was very consumable, and it really focused on the hits, the big moments of Curry's life. And I think he did a great job of balancing opening up, like pulling us behind the curtain without really getting into salacious private details at all. And he specifically mentions at the beginning, like this, I'm not going to talk about my love life and my relationships in that way because I think those are private. And I really thought that was very respectable. But he has so much depth of work in his career that he really took us from the start very chronologically through all these major moments and to the title of Vagabond. He is telling us that, he has kind of followed the wind as it's taken him, and that has really benefited him in his career. He's been all over the place, working in stage, working on screen, in musicals. He's done voice acting for video games, for narration of audiobooks. Like, he took us all through that, and across the board, just wonderful insights into his career and the joys that he's had. I think he also kind of opened up about failures, and especially increasing feelings of failure as he is reaching his elder age and seeing health issues and mental issues affect him, especially as he's had a stroke in recent years. And the kind of barriers to continuing on with the career he's had that has presented to him, the ways he's had to rely on people in ways he didn't before, and even the fans supporting him through that in ways he didn't expect was really, really cool. I will say because of that, I listened to the audiobook, and I'm familiar with his narration prior to his having a stroke, and this is the only thing I've really seen long form of him speaking since the stroke. And I would say I really enjoyed the aspect of having his voice. So I'm glad they didn't get someone else to narrate this if he was able. But it is an excessively long audiobook because he speaks very slowly and there are kind of unnatural cadence, unnatural pauses through the speech. But I loved getting it in his voice, getting his story told in his voice. And so for me, it was very worthwhile to have that. I think if you're looking purely from an audiobook experience, it's probably not a good audiobook experience in general because of those aspects. So it's kind of depends on what your aims are in seeking out the audio. I felt for me it was valuable having his voice on his story. So I think yeah, I think that's it for that one. Like, we had read that for my book club, and actually it was really fun because we ended up, it's a books and board games type of club. And so we pair usually our board game. We ended up playing Kill Dr. Lucky because nobody wanted to play Clue. And Kill Dr. Lucky is very Clue inspired, but I think it's a little simplistic comparatively and more replayable because there are kind of different options. So that ended up being a really fun choice that tied very nicely with the book. Onward. Anyway, let's go to Through Gates of Garnet and Gold by Seanan McGuire. This is, I think, the 11th book in the Wayward Children series. This is kind of a contemporary fantasy series where we follow kids coming back from portal worlds that they've gone to, fantastical portal worlds. And they come back because they've been rejected in some way, but they also feel like they don't belong here. So there are very strong aspects of self-exploration and identity throughout this series, very, very strongly. And this is definitely got that present. However, this feels like a very middle book, oddly. Over the course of the series, we alternate between books that are sort of in our world and crew books. So they're getting together and going on quests generally, even though questing is explicitly not allowed from the Home for Wayward Children. But then alternate to those books, we have a self-contained story of a child going to their portal world, usually as kind of a prequel or a backstory. And I tend to like those books much more. This one, I feel mixed because this is a crew novel. We're following Nancy, who we've met before, and we're kind of going to focus on her world of the Halls of the Dead. And yet something is going wrong there. I had not recalled from the Halls of the Dead. It's a very like statue filled, and you won't be able to see it on here, but they're very darkly are statues. So Nancy, as one of these living people there, they behave like statues and they barely move, and they move very, very slowly or not at all. They barely breathe over hours, things like that. And so she has really adapted to and loves that life for whatever reason. But what I had not remembered is that the reason they do that is because the Hall of the Dead is full of hungry ghosts that are just waiting for them to move so they can rip them apart, more or less. But the ghosts are not behaving the way they're supposed to and have kind of frenzied in a way. And she's looking for help with that situation. And so, of course, she turns to her friends at the Home for Wayward Children. And that is the big inciting incident here. So that sounds like it should be a fairly contained story, but it really didn't feel like it. And there were a lot of connections to the broader story that we've had over the course of the crew novels, or novellas, because these are tiny little novellas. But it felt very incomplete. It felt fragmentary to those because we have advanced different parts of the story. Increasingly, as we've gone along with these crew novellas in the series, it just feels like they're running back and forth. And that's really what this felt like. It felt like a lot of running back and forth and not a lot of progression or advancement of any sort of real plot. And that's fine, but it just feels like these are becoming less and less additive. So this was kind of a meh, very, very middling, sort of mediocre book. But I think that's typical of this series. Really, for me, about 1 out of every 3 is a real hit that is just awesome. And so I keep reading them for those, and that's been worthwhile to me, I think. But this one was just fine. And then let's go to a nonfiction, Niksen, Embracing the Dutch Art of Doing Nothing by Olga Mecking. And Olga is actually Polish rather than Dutch, and so she's embraced this as adopted culture. And Niksen more or less means nothinging, so it's kind of daydreaming, more or less, letting your mind wander and the values of that. This was not what I expected really though, and it's a tiny, weird, square little book, so you would think it's kind of insubstantial. It's also really prettily formatted, like we've got this color scheme throughout, and it's not as insubstantial as I had thought. It does have a lot of text and really good layouts of facts, I think, but they aren't the facts that I was sort of thinking I was going to get out of this, because the practical part of what to do is really just the very, very end. Much more, the lead up was her researching and is her giving anecdotes and commenting on other people who are talking about doing nothing, the rise in culture of doing nothing and the need for it. So there were lots and lots of references to other people's work, like Jenny Odell, for instance, who wrote Do Nothing. Gretchen Rubin, I think, is the Happiness Principle author. So throughout, there are lots of those types of books referenced, and some I've read, some I've not. as well as a background into Dutch culture surrounding this. And the fact that they don't really acknowledge this, but also do actively all seem to agree that they do it. Really interesting. I enjoyed, I think, that cultural aspect and learning more about Dutch culture most out of this. I think as it came to actually practicing Niksen, she gives some suggestions. She talks about the values of doing it, but doesn't really give any sort of structure to it, which obviously it's not supposed to be structured. I think the thing I found most interesting was that contrasting this with things like wellness, self-care practices, most of them assign you more things to do. And this is much more about taking away. So if you think about like self-care, you're talking about like assigning yourself doing a face mask or mani-pedi, those kind of things. Going and getting a massage even can be an additional task on your list of things to do. But Niksening is doing nothing, and it's intentionally removing and taking away, giving yourself less on your plate and allowing yourself just time to do nothing. And so I liked that aspect. I would struggle, and I think most people struggle with the element of, well, how do I shut my brain off? That's the main barrier to my doing this. And I think she had some good specific suggestions. Things like just taking a shower. I think shower thoughts are famous because we sort of let our mind wander when we're in the shower and are very effective at that for the most part. Puzzling, I think, is one that really I know works for me. But often I am so struggling with the anxiety spiral that I can't even get over the barrier to do those things. Well, not showering. I do shower regularly. But to puzzle, to do the things that are distracting for me, that I enjoy. And I don't feel like there was a lot of advice for that. So I think that was a struggle. But I think this was valuable, and I enjoyed reading it, especially for, as I said, those cultural elements. I also have to say, this was predominantly very well edited. It's really well, nicely presented. But something really weird showed up multiple times, and I felt like I was being gaslit or something, because at least 3 separate times in this book, it'll say on one line, one paragraph, it'll say, I lie on the couch, correctly. And then at some other point on the same page, usually like the next paragraph, it will say, I lie on the coach. And it happens at least 3 times in this book. And I cannot fathom how that made it through copy editing to happen so many times that I was actually questioning, is this like a colloquial way of using the term? Like, what if it were consistent throughout, I probably would have just let it pass. But clearly that's an editing problem. And I didn't find any other egregious editing problems, but just so weird. Very strange. Anyway, that was a nitpick, I think. So we are blazing through. This is going really well. Okay, last one that I finished this week is Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. And this was a real, I think, a triumph for both myself and Dia, who I was buddy reading it with, because I mentioned this in my TBR video, that we were coming from opposite sides, and I think we met in the middle, with both of us really strongly enjoying it, though I think it was not what we expected at all. So this is broken in 9 parts. And we're with Marco Polo and Kubla Khan as they're coming together and talking through these layouts of cities. And predominantly, Marco is telling Kubla Khan about all of these cities he has visited. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that is really the structure. So each part will open with them coming together, conversing, and then a bunch of little short snippets, usually like a page, of a description of a city, of multiple cities, so like 3 to 5 cities, and then they will come back and encapsulate that. And that's a really odd structure for a book. So it doesn't feel very like a novel at all, or a novella. I think it's under 200 pages. It doesn't feel like a story traditionally, and it's very vibey and meandering, but it's so beautifully written. It's just gorgeously, lushly written. And the descriptions of the cities are incredible. I found a lot of thematic elements were foreshadowed in the discussions beforehand, so for each part. So you would get some mention of something within the discussion that Khan and Marco were having, and then you would see that element come up in the city's descriptions. But I don't think that's really what it was about. I think coming out of it, it very strongly is about the quality of writing. And so that this felt like something where it's speaking from an author to other writers, even more so than to readers, about the elements that you put into a book, the ways that you might world build. And so it's not direct. This is not like a manual. It's not telling you that, but it is talking about all of these aspects of finding details and how you write in messaging indirectly through these weird conversations that they're having about the wonders of these cities. So it's very strange. It's really, really strange, but I think it was pretty effective. And definitely the writing stood out to me 100%. So I would wholeheartedly jump on reading more of Calvino's work, though I am now much more expecting something really abstract rather than kind of a cohesive narrative story. And maybe I think coming out of this was why I was so turned off to A New Me that I DNF'd at the beginning here, because I was starting it after this. And they have a similar abstraction quality and a similar like difficult to follow narrative or lack thereof. So they're very literary and they require a lot of you, but this one I really could see the things that I was going to get out of it really, really quickly, and the value in doing the work to read it, where A New Me, I just was not getting that at all. So this was wonderful, and I'm so, so glad that Dia brought up buddy reading it, because I really did enjoy it. Anyway, onward. So let's see. Stuff I am reading. I am working on the audio of Enshittification by Cory Doctorow. That finally came in. I was waiting for weeks and weeks for that one. I'm about halfway through, a little over halfway through, near 1,000 tables. And I also started Black Sheep by Georgette Heyer. So those are what I have in progress right now. Watching stuff was very good this week as well. So I finished up a couple things I had in progress, and then I started and finished one thing just in a big binge. So I finished up Blow Up Australia season 1. This is entirely like balloon twisting competition. So they make stuff out of balloons, giant big things. It was so cool because that's something I would not have expected or even considered having a competition for, but it was very neat. And I love that combination of like artistry and technicality in my reality show. So that's always something I find appealing. But like, this was so cool. Like the stuff they make is really neat. Like they had a whole dinosaur episode where they had to make giant dinosaurs. They had a fashion show episode where everyone made a wearable outfit, like couture dresses that actual human beings had to walk down the runway in. Amazing, really amazing stuff. So I very much enjoyed that. And they were all really funny people, and they're Australian. So they all seemed like they kind of got along and knew each other, because the balloon world apparently is very small. So it was really cool. Then I finished up The Ari Murders, which is I think Swedish show. Yeah, Swedish it would be, because the main character is a woman who is coming from the Stockholm police on leave to sort of a small town, it seems like, RA. And I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. But after showing up there, almost immediately there is a murder, and she gets caught up with the local police force, decides to kind of volunteer because they usually aren't handling this kind of thing. And so she steps in and assists on her leave. And then it ends up kind of sticking around there for more. So I'm not sure if it was separate seasons or just multiple different cases, more or less, that this continued over, but I finished all of the episodes that were available to me, which covers multiple different murder investigations. And I really like that show. Like, it's very well produced. I liked all the actors that are in it and kind of the different themes they're tackling and the topics of the different murder cases. Very, very cool. And then finally, the one that I started and finished was Free Body Problem. So as you'll know if you've been here, I just finished finally reading the last book of the trilogy, Death's End. And I really enjoyed the books, but they are a very different feeling from the show. However, the show does feel really, really true to the story of the books. And that's very jarring because they've sort of mashed together chronologically the content of the books, because the books are not, like, the course of the 3 books is not happening chronologically across the series, but each book is happening chronologically, if that makes any sense. Like book 2 and 3 happen around contemporary time at their beginning, but then go over really long spans of time. So they've mashed things together to be more chronological, and that has pulled everything really tight. And I enjoy how they delivered that so much. Like, it turned out so well. I think they humanized it so much more. There's so much more emotion in the series on the show, which was the struggle of the books, because they're not good at characterization and humanity in the books. It's very like technical and kind of dry. And here, like, for instance, there are many characters that we follow, but one of the characters that we're following is this very like ultra caring, emotional character. And you get the sense of that in the third book where he appears. But in the show, it comes across so much more. Like, you're not just getting what's happening to him and the people he cares about. You really get that sense of him and being just like, your heart going out to him as he's going through some struggles and the people he really cares about. And there's kind of this unrequited love story there. And it's just so beautiful. And so that character's narrative playing out like made me realize how emotional it was in the books, but you don't feel that emotion when you're reading the books as much. So I think they delivered on it really, really well. Oh my gosh, I cannot wait for more, really. Definitely need more from that because it was just so well delivered in every aspect. I will say, actually, kind of predictably, it's a little gruesome, but very rarely. So there are, especially the very opening scene, some really gruesome, gross moments that are very gory, very fully on screen. So those are present, but only a couple times over the entire series that's out already. So go in knowing that there's some graphic stuff, but very little. Anyway, I loved that. Fantastic. What else do I have for you today? I think that's it. My week was fairly quiet, and that's a good thing. Just did regular usual errands and took care of things. Lots of dog walking again because people are still significantly out sick, and I think that's unfortunately going to continue. It seems like we had a lot of reduced signups for people to walk dogs. So that took up some significant time. I went and I patted myself on the back because I went and got my oil changed for my car. And I had bought a prepaid service plan last year, betting on the fact that prices were only going to continue going up, which they have, and that I am expecting to be driving a little bit more and have been quite a bit more recently. And so I'm going to need more services, and this covers duration rather than, or more services than I will need within the time duration that it covers. So I'm very happy to have done that because I was able to just go in and it was already paid for and I didn't have to pay anything extra. So pat on the back to pass to me for planning ahead with that. And then I think that's about all for my week. It was very uneventful, really. So I think for my recommendations this week, I have two good recommendations. The first is an author interview. It's been a while since I've watched online author interviews, I think. But SFF Addicts had on Matt Dinneman, talking just generally about Dungeon Crawler Carl, hard to say, and also the new Bounce House book that's out. I've not read anything by this guy, but he's everywhere. And so I really need to get to those books, but I know I'm going to kind of want to consume them probably once I get into them. And I need to finish some more series before I dive in, which I'm always saying, but I'm doing pretty well on series this year, actually. So anyway, so that was a great author interview. And then the other is kind of a more chatty essay style video, which was also a collaborative video from Camilla at Hasty Books. Camilla invited a bunch of people to make short videos and compiled them together, talking about balancing booktube and life and finding that balance and kindness for yourself when you are challenged with the time commitments. I think it's really about finding that balance with any type of time demanding hobby that you might have. So I think this is much more broadly applicable than just people who have a booktube channel, for sure. And also, I just love seeing everybody's suggestions. It was great. So those are my two recommendations for this week. And I think I have rambled on, as always, more than necessary. So I will leave you with that and wish you a wonderful week in reading and in life. And thank you so very much for being here.